Hello! Welcome back to Storytime with Alex, reading Supernatural Night Terror by John Passarella. Decided to record one more before I went and had my lunch, so if you do hear my tummy rumbling at any point, I apologise. Get myself comfy. So, chapter 26 was pretty grim, with a lot of people dying in really horrendous ways. The Nocknitzer is fully living her life and stealing everybody else's. Let's see if in chapter 26 Sam and Dean manage to do anything, or if we just hear about more people dying horribly. Brace yourselves. 26. For the past 2 days, Bryn Gunning had felt a tickle in her throat, a sure sign she was coming down with a head cold or some kind of virus she had probably picked up from one of her 5th grade students. During the school year, someone was always sick, and the viruses survived by tag team propagation, as she called it. Sometimes it seemed as if schools were just incubators for the evolution of the superflu that would one day create an extinction event for the human race. A bit close to the bone there. Or maybe she was feeling sorry for herself at the thought of yet another illness racking her body for the next 3 to 6 weeks. She'd been getting plenty of rest and taking echinacea, zinc, and megadoses of vitamin C since the first sign of the cold, hoping to nip it in its viral bud. But that strategy always amounted to little more than hopeless optimism. At least, she reasoned, she'd go down swinging. Thunderstorms jarred her from sleep, and the uncomfortable dream she'd been having about difficulty swallowing. Tangled up in her bed sheets, she wrestled her way out of bed and stumbled towards the bathroom in her fuzzy bunny slippers. Without warning, she began to cough and couldn't stop. It was a dry cough, and soon she was wheezing, unable to catch her breath. Flicking on the bathroom light, she grabbed a cup and tried to fill it with tap water, while her body was racked with spasms. She managed to get a mouthful into the cup and half of that into her mouth, then sprayed it across the mirror as another round of coughing doubled her over. Hacking, she had the sensation that there was something caught in her throat, and it was trying to get out. With trembling fingers, she reached into her mouth, grabbed something hard and pulled. The size of a large button, it had thin, twitching legs. Oh, this is grim. Disgusting, she flung it into the sink, and it crawled around the basin. A cockroach. Backing away from the sink, she bumped against the door and wiped her saliva-sticky hands against her oversized nightshirt, panting. Then the panting degraded into more coughing. She spat 3 more wiggling cockroaches out of her mouth. Weeping and shaking in revulsion, she gagged as she imagined them swarming in her stomach and crawling up her throat. On hands and knees she crossed to the toilet, flung up the lid, and gripped the edge of the bowl a moment before the torrent of vomit surged up her esophagus. Clear fluid streaked with blood and riddled with squirming cockroaches, centipedes, and spiders spilled out of her and flowed down the side of the toilet bowl. Desperately, she reached for the handle to flush the chitinous mass down the drain, but many of the bugs scrambled up the porcelain and dropped to her tile flooring. They wriggled and twitched and scuttled towards her legs. Screaming between coughing fits, she scrambled out of the bathroom in a frantic crab walk, rolled over, and ran towards her bedside telephone. She lifted the receiver and punched in 911. Her stomach rumbled alarmingly. The operator answered, but when Bryn tried to explain what was happening, she could only cough and hack, and she spit up more bugs. Several landed moistly on her forearm and skittered towards the hand holding the phone, while others scrambled up her arm under the loose sleeve of her nightshirt. Dropping the phone in disgust, she swatted at the bugs nestling in her armpit or crossing over the swell of her breasts. At some point, she'd lost her fuzzy slippers, and as she backed away from the phone, bugs on the floor squished between her toes. She gasped for air and coughed again, hacking out a wiggling centipede, before she ran from her bedroom in a blind panic and stumbled down the stairs, catching herself on the railing a moment before she would have plunged headfirst to the landing. In sparing herself from a nasty fall, she twisted her right wrist hard enough that she thought something had broken. Cradling her throbbing wrist against her rumbling stomach, she flung open the front door and ran into the street, grateful that the stormy night had brought cleansing rain to wash away the live bugs crawling on her body and the bits of dead bugs tangled in her hair or clinging to her face, arms, and legs. She lived behind the school where she worked, in the eastern suburbs of Clayton Falls, and had always loved that when the weather was pleasant she could walk to work. Now she ran towards the sprawling elementary school building as if it were a sanctuary for her. By the time she realised she should have stayed close to home after placing the incoherent emergency call, her stomach was protruding painfully behind her nightshirt. She pressed her hands to her abdomen and felt her flesh rippling under her fingers. With each painful step she coughed up more blood with the bugs. No matter how many of them she expelled, more remained inside her, and they were impatient to get out. From the sharp pains telegraphing from her abdomen, she knew they were eating their way out of her body. She ran as far as the playground equipment before collapsing to her hands and knees. Sobbing, she couldn't find the energy to rise again. Wood chips bit into her palms and bare knees. Gagging, she coughed up a wolf spider large enough to fill her palm. As it dropped to the ground, she smashed it with her fist. A stabbing pain took her breath away. She flopped on her back and moaned in agony. Clutching at the bottom of her nightshirt, she pulled it up to expose her engorged abdomen. As she watched, golf ball-sized lumps moved under her bruised skin. She clamped her fingers against the shifting mass, and broken fingernails cut into her skin. Blood welled up and the rain washed it away. Then, through one of the cuts, something dark brown edged upwards with twitching antennae and tiny barbed legs. The submerged mass gravitated towards the breach, pushing, surging, and Brim screamed as her flesh tore open and released hundreds, thousands of roaches, beetles, centipedes, crickets, and spiders. Blood gushed out of her ruptured stomach, running down her sides and soaking into the bed of wet wood chip. But the bugs clung to her. They swarmed over her skin, biting and burrowing back into the flesh they had so recently escaped. Oh, well, that was hideous. Let's take a moment. There's more of this chapter to go. Always tired because sleep was no longer restful for her, Carla Batty would nod off in unconventional locations. Often she fell asleep on the sofa or an easy chair at home rather than in her own bed. On several occasions, while sitting in one of the rear pews at United Methodist, she dozed off during the long sermons. 2 weeks in a row, the Clayton Falls librarian had to wake her up after she spent too much time debating which New York Times bestseller to check out. And once, unfortunately, she'd fallen asleep while sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic on the I-80. Although she often woke up from these impromptu naps with a blood-curdling scream before regaining her senses and her sense of decorum, her neighbours were nothing short of sympathetic. Because they knew her as one of the few survivors of the Clayton Falls Apparel Company fire. Her car insurance company, on the other hand, had been less understanding about the fender bender that had jarred her back to consciousness on the interstate. For a while she took the prescribed sleeping pills so she could sleep at night, through the night, but the pills made it harder to awaken from the nightmares, which then became even more terrifying. After a week or so, she put the pills aside. 6 months had passed since the factory fire, but Carla continued to have vivid nightmares about the raging flames and suffocating smoke that had taken the lives of her co-workers, many of whom had become close friends. Long after her doctor removed the plaster cast from the ankle she broke after jumping from the second-story factory window to escape the blaze, the psychological wounds refused to heal. She tried counselling for a while, learned about survivor's guilt and post-traumatic stress, but none of the rationalizations or medications stopped the nightmares. Each night she relived those minutes of stark terror before she had managed to escape the inferno. She hadn't worked on the factory floor. She'd been a bookkeeper, leveraging her associate's degree in accounting to earn an income that impressed no one. With what she always described as dumb luck, she'd taken a break from her tedious bank reconciliations to restock her desk drawers when the fire overwhelmed the factory. In the second-floor supply room, clutching several rolls of adding machine tape, a few pens and telephone message pads, she'd staggered when she'd heard and felt the gas explosion. At the time, she imagined a tractor-trailer had jumped the curb outside and ploughed into one of the building's walls. Only later, after she escaped, did she learn the cause of the destruction. Seconds after the explosion, the heat became unbearable. Scattered supplies forgotten at her feet, she edged out of the second-floor room into what felt like the heat of a furnace. Sinuous flames flowing up every surface, charring wood, leaping from point to point, devouring the old factory with incredible alacrity. Soon the billowing black smoke became overwhelming. She heard the screams, but the burning bodies, her choking friends and co-workers, suffered and died beneath a turbulent shroud of impenetrable smoke. Almost every night Karen relived the fear and hopelessness of that moment, the certainty that she would die with the others. She always awoke from the nightmare version of those events before she noticed the beacon of light at the end of the catwalk, before she sprinted to that recalcitrant window in its warped frame, before she smashed it open with her jacketed elbow, scrambled through while sustaining multiple lacerations, and dropped to the cement courtyard below, grateful for the stabbing pain in her leg because it meant she was alive, that she had miraculously survived. The nightmares always ended on the high note of her fear, not on the glimmer of hope, as if she had never escaped. Once again the fullness of the nightmare seized through her subconscious, striking the nerve-jangling chord of fear at the penultimate moment, rousing her in that familiar, heart-stopping instant to stark consciousness, gasping for air. But strangely, she found herself in her own bed. For the briefest time, drenched with perspiration, she marvelled that she had managed to reach her bed before passing out from chronic exhaustion. Despite the recurrence of the nightmare, she entertained the idea that she had made progress. Maybe she wouldn't need to move from Clayton Falls to free herself from reliving the horror. She'd been saving her money to move away from town and its constant reminders, but no, she would move. To the West Coast, maybe. Start over, make new friends, and... She coughed. The acrid tang of smoke filled her mouth. Suddenly, her smoke alarms wailed. No! An orange glow flared down the hall as a coughing spasm racked her body. She stumbled out of bed, doubled over as black smoke swirled around her as if she were the centre of a vortex. Dropping to her knees, she fought for breath, her tears etching soot-streaked tracks on her cheeks as she cast about frantically for an escape route. In seconds, the walls around her were engulfed in flames, and the suffocating layers of smoke bore down on her. Face down on the beige carpet, she watched in horror as tongues of flame detached from the burning walls and darted toward her. When her nightgown ignited, she screamed, but only for a second. Another coughing spasm curled into a fetal position, blotting out her vision. She swatted at the flames, searing her legs until the palms of her hands were no more than raw, shrieking nerve endings. But before she blacked out, in the moments before pain trumped everything else, her earlier thought returned. She had never really escaped the fire. The Knocknitzer revelled in the darkness her effort had created, but reaching so far beyond her unformed body had drained her energy. She floated through the night sky and drifted downward, slipping into a house, creeping towards her victim in her guise of shadow, and found him ready for her influence. A small pulse of her power, and he drifted into sleep, a ready conduit. Eric Vogel made a call earlier in the day to see his doctor, but reached his answering service instead. Apparently, Doc Bennett didn't have weekend hours, so Eric had to wait until Monday. Unless it was an emergency, in which case the service directed him to the critical care facility. For a man like Vogel, who had survived 2 car crashes, a fall on his noggin from a 2-story ledge while hanging shutters, and the cave-in at Croydon Creek, which had left him with one good hand, extreme exhaustion hardly qualified as an emergency. He suspected his heart might not be pumping at maximum efficiency. Hell, he'd be surprised if the needle hovered in the 70% range most of the time. Of course, it could be his lungs. Lung cancer was not out of the realm of possibility for a former miner, not by a long shot. But he was exhausted, not short of breath. And though he was bone-tired, sleep was elusive during the worst of the thunderstorm. He turned on the local news and heard there'd been a tornado sighting at the western edge of town. That crisis seemed to have passed. Listening to the rest of the world's troubles didn't seem like a remedy for sleeplessness, so he switched off the old television set and picked up a book about John Adams he'd been meaning to read for the past few weeks. 5 pages further into the legacy of the second President of the United States, his eyes gave out, His drooping eyelids finally closed, and his head bowed forward in sleep. A curtain of darkness slid down the surface of the wall and began to coalesce above him. The lamp on the table at his side flickered off on several times before winking out. Glowing red eyes appeared in the new darkness, and a dark hand with elongated fingers closed over the old man's forehead. That's the end of that chapter. And I guess we're going to find out what his nightmares are all about in chapter 27. Oh dear. That was really grim. I feel very itchy after that bug bit.